I've heard it written that he promoted the idea that Sandy Hook was a conspiracy, but they're not quoting. When they say that, there's no quotes. There's no Sandy Hook was a hoax. Those kids were actors. Those kids are not dead. I don't see that anywhere.
Right.
But they keep attributing that to him without quotations.
But again, if there was some kind of process, due process, we could go back and look at the transcript and we would know this.
Not only that, if during this whole time where he's being tried, he was still able to be on YouTube and have his videos, he could show in his videos that he didn't say that. He could show what he actually said and tell you what he actually said and show clips. He can't do that anymore. So now the narrative is completely in the hands of the mainstream media, 100%. So the Alex Jones narrative is being taken 100% out of his hands. And now it's in the mainstream media, and now there's Sandy Hook denier, conspiracy theorist, right-wing lunatic, all these different things, which may or some of it. I mean, Alex is pretty fucking nuts.
My point is,
the left is doing what it always does, which is to attempt to destroy voices raised up against it in rational opposition, advocating for freedom, free markets, limited government, and a reduction of the general amount of coercion within society. They cannot argue against this perspective. It is a civilized, reasonable perspective, and therefore they attempt to erase or destroy those who voice opposition to them because they're desperate for power and the resources that it brings, to the point where they cannot stand debate against them. What you cannot win fairly, but desperately need, you will win unfairly. If you cannot buy the drug you are desperately addicted to, you will simply steal it. And the power that they want, they cannot earn through negotiation, through reason, because what they want is fundamentally anti-rational, and therefore they take it by force, or they simply erase people who disagree with them effectively. Now, we are talking about Alex Jones and InfoWars, of course, who have been scrubbed from all forms of social media, unpersoned, deplatformed, erased, 1984 style, all the way from Facebook to YouTube to iTunes to Spotify to LinkedIn, where he hadn't even uploaded any content. He is vanished, he is gone, and the millions upon millions of people who enjoyed his views, who enjoyed his challenges and his rants and his insights and his interviews, well, it's all gone from these platforms. Now, there are, of course, a lot of people saying, well, it's a private company, they can ban whoever they want. Actually, they can't. They can't. Look, I'm no lawyer, but this is my understanding of how it goes. If you are a newspaper, you exercise editorial control over the content of your newspaper. So let's say a reporter writes something slanderous, you can sue the newspaper because the newspaper is not just letting anyone publish whatever they want. The newspaper is exercising editorial control over the content of the paper and therefore liable for what is there. Now, the social media giants have escaped legal liability for the content of their platform because they say, hey, we're just a platform, we're neutral, we don't act politically, we're not particularly focused on one group versus another. We just have these standards, like hate speech, incitement to violence, whatever it is. We just have these standards, we get complaints, we deal with them, and it's impartial and it's neutral, therefore we're not responsible for the content of what is published. We're not exercising editorial control of the content on our platforms. Now, if it turns out, and it sure seems to be the case, but if it turns out that they are targeting conservative voices on their platforms, in other words, if they are over-applying particular standards against conservatives while not applying them all against other groups that have far more egregious violations of their terms of service, then they are, in my view, exercising editorial control. Now, if that turns out to be the case, and I'm sure this will be adjudicated in a court of law at some point in the not too distant future, if it turns out that that is the case, then they become legally liable for what is posted on their platforms, which means that their platforms cannot survive. Of course, we've all seen these examples where they say, oh, such and such a conservative promoted this or that or was bad or hate speech or whatever. But you can see for yourself. There are, on various social media platforms, Antifa message boards where they openly plot and plan political violence, which is the definition of terrorism. Open terrorist networks. There are jihadi recruitment sites all over the place, which are not being shut down, which are not being deplatformed, which are not being erased. The great Candace Owens took a couple tweets from the woman recently hired by the New York Times, which was railing against white people and saying the most unbelievably hateful and racist things about white people, replaced white people with black people, and was immediately banned. So of course they're exercising editorial control, in my humble opinion, because I'm an empiricist, and that's what the data very clearly shows. Because if they're so sensitive to conservatives saying supposedly hateful or devastating things, but they don't exercise that same deplatforming on groups that openly advocate and plan for violence using their platform, then clearly there is a political purpose at work here, which means they're no longer neutral. So, no, don't try this free market crap. This is not rational. It doesn't work. And it simply says, well, you're afraid to take on these people. Well, we have to. Like, I'm sorry, this is just, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong to deplatform someone in this manner on what? Well, he said this, he did that. Well, you show me, sort by order of egregiousness, and you show me how Alex Jones is at the top of anyone's list compared to the jihadis and Antifas and other organizations out there openly calling for, advocating and planning for and plotting for violence. Come on. Come on. Trump is showing, was it 4+% growth in the most recent quarter? Unbelievable amounts of jobs created, manufacturing coming back, the necessary and healthy, quote, trade wars beginning to reduce tariffs and exploitation of American workers by foreign governments and so on. They don't want the free market to work. They don't want capitalism to work. Of course, right? They don't want to work, so they don't want there to be more jobs. They don't want the system to work, the left. The left is invested in the failure and destruction of Western freedoms, and therefore they get hysterical, not because Trump is failing, but because the free market is succeeding. As those of us who know anything about the free market roundly predicted many years ago, yes, the fact that he cut taxes and is cutting regulations and so on is causing business to roar up. You pull a big stone out of the river, the water rushes into the hole, and you pull impediments out of the way. The free market does its efficient and wonderful job of creating and producing and satisfying customer wants in a fairly voluntary manner. I say fairly voluntary because the government is still involved in so many transactions, because people get offended by something that is said. And they go from, I hate that speech, to that is objectively hate speech, to hate speech must be banned. What's being banned is something that stimulates them negatively, that gives them a negative stimuli of any kind. And because they're unable to reason with and manage their own emotions, they end up having to control absolutely everyone else. And it will never end. Because if you don't learn how to manage negative stimuli, if you snowflake yourself, if you isolate yourself from negative stimuli, that's the exact wrong thing to do. You get weaker, more hysterical, more panicked, and that's why you get triggered by this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and less less stimulus is required to trigger you more and more, and you end up in this hysterical escalation where you end up having to control everyone all the time, no matter what, and that will never be enough. And of course, the point is to make everybody who's not on the left begin to censor themselves so they don't end up that way, right? You understand, it is, to use an analogy, you don't have to shoot everyone in the village to get compliance. 1 or 2 people, and everyone else is going to kind of fall into line because they don't want to end up the same way. And so, yes, of course, the whole deplatforming of InfoWars is going to cause everyone else to say, ooh, well, I better stay away from this topic, and I better talk about this, I better not talk about that, otherwise it's going to end up in the same way. But it will never stop. And people say, well, Alex Jones, these wild conspiracy theories, they didn't pan out. Yeah, for sure. Some of his wild conspiracy theories did not pan out. But some of them did. And if free speech requires that you be perfect, then you have no free speech at all. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. And if you say somebody who makes a mistake, somebody who's wrong about something, no longer has the right of free speech, well, guess what? You're not perfect. And you will be next.